In the heart of a small, isolated town, nestled deep within a dense forest, stood an old, decrepit house that was the stuff of local legends. For generations, the townsfolk had whispered tales of its dark history, passing down stories that sent shivers down the spines of children and adults alike. It was known simply as the widow's house, a name that sent chills down the spine of anyone who dared to speak it aloud. The house had once belonged to a widow named Eleanor, who had lived there with her husband and 2 children. Eleanor was a reclusive woman, rarely seen outside her home, and the townsfolk knew little about her. Rumors swirled about her husband's mysterious disappearance and her 2 children, who were said to have vanished without a trace. It was said that Eleanor had become consumed by grief and madness, and she was rumored to have practiced dark, forbidden rituals in her home. As the years passed, the widow's house fell into disrepair, its windows boarded up, its yard overgrown with weeds, and its once grand facade crumbling. The townsfolk avoided it like the plague, fearing that the house was cursed, that the spirits of Eleanor and her family still lingered within its walls. One gloomy autumn evening, a young woman named Emily found herself in desperate need of shelter. She had been traveling through the forest, searching for her missing brother, James, who had disappeared without a trace. Emily had heard whispers of the widow's house and its ominous reputation, but her concern for her brother outweighed her fear of the legends. With the sun setting and darkness descending upon the forest, Emily approached the house cautiously. She pushed open the creaking, wrought iron gate and made her way up the winding path to the front door. The house loomed above her, its rotting timbers and cracked windows seeming to watch her every move. Emily entered the widow's house, her footsteps echoing in the empty, dusty foyer. The air was heavy with the musty scent of decay, and cobwebs hung in every corner. The flickering light of her lantern cast eerie shadows that danced on the peeling wallpaper. As Emily explored further into the house, she came upon a room that seemed to be frozen in time. It was a child's bedroom, its walls adorned with faded wallpaper featuring playful scenes of animals and fairy tale characters. Toys were strewn about the floor, and a small bed with tattered sheets sat in the corner. Emily's heart ached as she thought of her missing brother, and she couldn't help but wonder if this room had once belonged to one of Eleanor's children. She couldn't shake the feeling that there was a connection between her brother's disappearance and the widow's house. With each passing hour, the house seemed to come alive with strange and unsettling noises. Whispers echoed in the hallways, and the floorboards groaned as if bearing the weight of unseen footsteps. Emily tried to convince herself that it was just her imagination playing tricks on her, but the unease in her heart only grew. As the night deepened, Emily decided to investigate further. She climbed the creaking stairs to the second floor, where the air grew even colder. The hallway was lined with closed doors, each one hiding its own secrets. She reached for the nearest doorknob and turned it slowly, revealing a dimly lit room filled with dusty, old books. The room appeared to be a study, with shelves upon shelves of ancient tomes and dusty manuscripts. As Emily perused the titles, she noticed that many of them were written in languages she couldn't understand, and their covers bore strange symbols and illustrations. It was as if the room held the knowledge of forbidden mysteries. Suddenly, a chill ran down Emily's spine as she heard a faint, eerie melody. It was the haunting sound of a music box playing a mournful tune. The sound seemed to come from somewhere nearby, and Emily followed it down the dimly lit hallway. She entered another room, its door ajar, and her lantern revealed a scene straight out of a nightmare. The room was filled with an assortment of broken, dusty old dolls. They lay strewn about the floor, their eyes vacant and lifeless, their porcelain limbs twisted at unnatural angles. In the center of the room, Emily saw the source of the haunting melody, a music box, its lid adorned with an intricate carving of a woman who bore a striking resemblance to the long-dead Eleanor. The music box played on its own, the tune growing louder and more melancholic with each passing moment. Terrified and unable to bear the haunting melody any longer, Emily slammed the lid of the music box shut. The room fell silent, and the dolls remained motionless, their eerie gaze seemingly fixed on her. She retreated from the room and continued her exploration of the house, determined to find any clues that might lead her to her missing brother. The hours stretched into an eternity, and with each room she entered, the sense of dread and foreboding deepened. Emily's lantern grew dim, and the oppressive darkness of the house seemed to press in on her from all sides. She heard whispered voices in the shadows, and strange, ghostly apparitions flitted at the edges of her vision. The very walls of the house appeared to pulse with an otherworldly energy, as if the very essence of the place was malevolent. Finally, Emily reached the attic, a place she had dreaded from the moment she entered the house. The attic was said to be where Eleanor had performed her darkest rituals, where the malevolent spirits were said to be at their most powerful. With trembling hands, Emily pushed open the attic door and ascended the narrow staircase. The attic was a cavernous space filled with strange symbols drawn in chalk on the wooden floor. In the center of the room, an ornate, blackened cauldron stood on a pedestal, its contents bubbling and hissing as if alive. As Emily approached the cauldron, she realized that it emitted an eerie, greenish glow. She recoiled in horror as she saw the twisted, shadowy figures that danced in the cauldron's depths, their forms shifting and contorting as if in pain. Suddenly, the air grew frigid, and a voice whispered in Emily's ear, sending shivers down her spine. "You should not have come here, child." Emily turned to see a spectral figure standing before her, a woman with long, disheveled hair and hollow, empty eyes. It was Eleanor, the widow who had lived in this cursed house. "Who are you?" Emily stammered, her voice trembling. "I am Eleanor," the spectral figure replied, her voice filled with sorrow and anger. "I have waited for someone to release me from this torment, but you have only brought more darkness to this place." Emily felt a surge of fear and guilt. She had unwittingly unleashed something malevolent by entering the widow's house, something that had been imprisoned here for untold years. As Emily attempted to flee the attic, the house seemed to come alive with a sinister force. The walls groaned and shifted, trapping her within its malevolent grasp. The whispers grew louder, and the dolls from the room below seemed to come to life, their porcelain limbs moving with unnatural grace as they closed in on her. Desperate and terrified, Emily called out for her missing brother, James. In that moment, a flicker of recognition crossed Eleanor's spectral face. "James," Eleanor whispered, her voice filled with a mixture of longing and anguish. "He is here, trapped within the walls of this cursed house, just as I am." Eleanor's revelation sent a chill through Emily's heart. She had to find a way to rescue her brother and put an end to the curse that had plagued the widow's house for generations. With a burst of determination, Emily reached for the music box she had encountered earlier and opened it once more. The haunting melody filled the attic, and the dolls retreated, their lifeless gazes turning towards the music. Eleanor's spectral figure began to waver and fade, and she let out a mournful cry. "No, you cannot do this. You cannot break the curse." But Emily knew she had no choice. She continued to wind the music box, its melody growing louder and more powerful. As the music swelled, the entire attic seemed to tremble, and the malevolent force that had trapped her began to weaken. With a final, triumphant turn of the music box's key, Emily shattered the curse that had bound the widow's house for generations. The spectral figures and malevolent presence dissipated, leaving only silence and darkness in their wake. Exhausted and shaken, Emily stumbled out of the attic and made her way back down the narrow staircase. The house had fallen eerily quiet, and the oppressive atmosphere had lifted. As Emily stepped out of the widow's house, she felt a profound sense of relief and triumph. She knew that her brother, James, was still somewhere within the house, but she was determined to find him and free him from whatever darkness had ensnared him. With the first light of dawn breaking over the horizon, Emily vowed to return to the widow's house, armed with knowledge and courage. She would face the horrors within and rescue her brother, no matter the cost. The legends of the widow's house would live on, but it was a new chapter that Emily would write, one of bravery, determination, and the unbreakable bond between siblings, even in the face of unspeakable terror. It was a typical Friday night, and John found himself home alone. His parents had gone away for the weekend, leaving him in charge of the house. The evening started out uneventful. John decided to order pizza, watch some TV, and relax after a long week of school and work. As the hours passed, a sense of unease began to creep over him. The wind outside howled, rattling the windows and causing the trees to scratch against the house. It was a dark, stormy night, and the flickering of the television cast eerie shadows around the room. John couldn't shake the feeling that he was being watched, but he tried to convince himself it was just his imagination playing tricks on him. He decided to check all the doors and windows to make sure they were securely locked. Everything seemed fine, but the unease persisted. With a sigh, John settled back onto the couch, hoping that a comedy show would help him relax. But just as he was starting to unwind, the lights flickered, and the TV went black. He groaned and reached for his phone to use its flashlight to navigate to the circuit breaker. In the dim light of his phone, John descended into the basement. The old wooden steps creaked with each step, making him feel like he was walking into the belly of the beast. As he reached the basement, he realized that the circuit breaker had tripped. He flipped the switch, and the lights came back on. Relieved, John turned to head back upstairs when he heard a strange noise, like a whisper, but there was no one else in the house. He dismissed it as a trick of the wind and hurried back upstairs. Back in the living room, John attempted to resume his night of relaxation, but the feeling of being watched persisted. He couldn't shake the sensation that something was lurking just out of sight, in the shadows. His unease grew as he heard more strange sounds, a faint tapping on the window, the rustling of curtains, and footsteps on the creaky floorboards above. He knew he was home alone, and fear began to gnaw at him. Summoning his courage, John decided to investigate the source of the strange noises. He crept upstairs, the wooden steps groaning under his weight. The hallway upstairs was dimly lit, and the shadows seemed to move as if they had a life of their own. As he approached his parents' bedroom, John's heart pounded in his chest. The door was slightly ajar, and the room was shrouded in darkness. He hesitated, but then pushed the door open. Inside, he saw something that made his blood run cold. A figure stood at the foot of the bed, shrouded in shadow. It had a menacing presence, and John couldn't make out any features. It just stood there, silently watching him. Terror gripped John, and he stumbled backward, fleeing the room and slamming the door shut. He fumbled for his phone and called the police, his voice trembling as he reported an intruder in the house. Minutes felt like hours as he waited for the police to arrive. The house seemed to come alive with eerie noises, and the feeling of being watched grew more intense. John huddled in a corner, clutching his phone tightly. When the police finally arrived, they searched the entire house, but found no sign of an intruder. They assured John that it was likely just his imagination playing tricks on him, but he couldn't shake the feeling that something malevolent had been in the house. With the police gone, John was left alone once more. He couldn't bring himself to stay in the house, so he decided to spend the night at a friend's place. As he left, he cast one last uneasy glance at his home, haunted by the unsettling events of the night. In the days that followed, John couldn't help but wonder if he had experienced a true paranormal encounter or if it had all been a product of his overactive imagination. But one thing was certain: home alone had never felt so unsettling, and he couldn't shake the feeling that he might never truly be alone in his own house again. Weeks turned into months, and John's life gradually returned to normal. He began to chalk up that fateful night to a combination of stress and a vivid imagination. He even joked about it with his friends, creating a spooky narrative of his own. However, as time passed, strange occurrences began to unfold within the confines of his home. It started with subtle noises, a faint whisper in the middle of the night, an unexplained draft that sent shivers down his spine, and the feeling of being watched, which had never truly left him. John's friends began to notice the changes in him. He became more withdrawn, his once vibrant personality gradually dimming. They attributed it to the lingering trauma of that night, but John knew there was something more sinister at play. One evening, as he sat alone in the living room, he saw an apparition, a shadowy figure that seemed to materialize out of thin air. It had the same menacing presence he had encountered that fateful night. It stood there, silently watching him, its form shifting and undulating. Fear consumed John as he stared at the spectral figure. He tried to move, to scream, but his body refused to obey. The apparition drew closer, its eyes, hollow and devoid of life, fixed upon him. It raised a spectral hand, and John felt an icy chill enveloping him. Then, with a sudden, bone-chilling scream, the apparition vanished, leaving John trembling and gasping for breath. He knew he could no longer dismiss these occurrences as mere figments of his imagination. Something malevolent had taken residence in his home, and it was growing stronger. Desperation set in, and John sought the help of paranormal investigators and mediums, hoping to rid his home of the malevolent entity. They conducted seances, cleansings, and even brought in exorcists, but nothing seemed to work. The entity's presence only grew more oppressive, more malevolent. John's life became a never-ending nightmare. Sleepless nights were plagued by eerie apparitions, ghostly whispers, and the feeling of an unseen presence drawing closer. His once beloved home had become a prison of dread. As the entity's torment escalated, John began to unravel. He lost his job, his friends distanced themselves, and his sanity hung by a fragile thread. Hollow-eyed and broken, he knew that he could no longer remain in his own home. One fateful night, with a heavy heart, John made the painful decision to leave Oak Ridge House behind. He had lost everything: his sense of security, his peace of mind, and his very identity. The malevolent force that had taken root in his home had consumed him, leaving only a shell of the person he once was. As he walked away from the house that had been in his family for generations, he couldn't help but wonder if he was leaving behind more than just a haunted mansion. The dark history of Oak Ridge House had taken its toll on him, and the malevolent entity that dwelled within its walls had claimed another victim. The legend of Oak Ridge House continued to haunt the town, a cautionary tale of a place where darkness dwelled and the past never truly died. And John, the one who had once called it home, carried with him the scars of a haunting that would forever remain etched in his memory, a chilling reminder that some horrors are not bound by time or reason, and that even the walls of a familiar home can hold unimaginable terrors when you find yourself alone in the darkness.